Good afternoon and welcome to the Student Policy Hack presentation portion on our third day of the Spring 2021 Environmental Resilience for Economic Growth and National Security virtual fly-in. We're going to be hearing from 3 student groups presenting coastal resilience policy presentations based on the great information and discussions they've had so far this week. I'm going to turn it over now to our first group, and there's 10 minutes to present.
Timer going? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us your time today, be that panelists or other students participating in this fly-in. We are part of the Spring 2021 fly-in for FIU in DC, and thank you for giving us the time to speak on policy solutions for environmental and coastal resilience for the fly-in with the very specific theme of the future of environmental resilience for economic growth and national security. My name is Andrea Negrin, and I am an economics student here at FIU.
My name is Vanessa. I'm an environmental studies student at FIU.
Hi, my name is Gabriela, and I'm a sustainability and environmental student at FIU.
And my name is Joshua Nolasco. I'm a political science major here at FIU.
We actually also have one more participant. Her name is Maureen, and she is a PhD candidate in the history department. Unfortunately, though, she was not able to make it.
Okay, so our policy solutions mainly focused on South Florida. As South Florida residents, we looked at some of the environmental concerns that we faced here, and we applied them on a broader national scale. And the pollutants that cause serious economic, environmental, and safety risks to the coastal communities such as Miami and across the nation use innovative funding strategies that can help accomplish lasting change.
So let's try and figure out to understand the problem. So there are some aspects here, right? So we have nutrients. There are excessive nutrients that are going into our water systems that really hurt the environment, people, and the economy. Also, plastic pollution. It's affecting the health of our economies and coastal communities especially, and also the problem of funding. We decided to do community-based innovative funding strategies that are needed to show to address the problems right now. So what are one of these scientific-based solutions to combat these issues? So to reduce the nutrient flow into water systems, as we see in Biscayne Bay, which is a huge issue, we decided to look into outfall pumps. So these are special pumps that connect to the existing drainage systems and ditches, so there's no need for extra costs on that side. These pumps filter trash and also waste pollution, ultimately restoring the natural deposit systems such as Biscayne Bay with clean aerated water. And that's also an important point because this water needs oxygen in it. These pumps are also less energy intensive as regular pumps, which is great for energy efficiency. They create new jobs to maintain the systems, which is great for the economy. And it also ensures the health and safety for the people and the environment.
So another aspect of reducing nutrient flow is implementing more composting facilities across the nation. So landfills emit a very strong green gas emissions, and one of them being carbon dioxide emissions. And so the idea is to be able to repurpose these compostable items and food scraps for more sustainable motives. And the effects of waste are soil contamination, air contamination, water contamination, has impact on human health, impact on animals and marine life. It also attracts and houses disease-carrying pests. It affects the local economy. There's missed recycling and composting opportunities. So there have been, we can look at a few examples in other states like Connecticut and Vermont. They have implemented a law that basically states that commercial entities that generate excessive food waste are banned from sending it to a landfill. We can also take a look at Seattle, where they implemented a municipal code that describes that residents and businesses cannot put compostables and recyclables in the garbage. So this just goes to prove that we can, as a nation, take more sustainable steps towards a more sustainable future.
Next, we would like to discuss cross-sector and cross-institutional collaboration. Everything that we've presented so far is not a new idea. Water pumps and water filtration systems are not new. They've existed longer than most of us have been alive. So we're definitely not taking credit for that. However, what we do think is an innovative step is local governments raising funds differently. One of the main ways that we think that we can raise funds for this initiative is through crowdfunding and municipal blue bonds. Essentially, if my local town needs to buy a fire truck, I can buy a $25 government bond, and I know that I own $25 worth of that fire truck, and I can hold the pride in knowing that I own a little bit of something that's benefiting my community. That's a very simple example, and obviously it's not the same as water pumps, but I hope it's painted a good picture. Through crowdfunding and municipal blue bonds, stakeholders get to directly invest into their community and earn a tax-free profit once those bonds mature. Municipal bonds, be those blue bonds, green bonds, or impact investment bonds, are a relatively new concept, and we hope that they can be appropriately executed for this specific initiative. We really do think it will be very beneficial. Aside from crowdfunding and blue bonds, we have the option of donations. Local businesses are incentivized to donate, and they receive tax write-offs as well as positive local publicity. I apologize for the typo here. It should say positive local, not positive local publicity. Finally, we do need federal and state support. Federally, the government can help foot the bill of the water pumps. These are expensive, and ultimately, despite the fact that they are less cost intensive and less energy intensive, someone still has to help us foot the bill. Also at the state level, Florida specifically has a very friendly business environment that is conducive to bringing big tech firms and startup firms to the South Florida region. So that investment from local donations is definitely something that we hope will have a positive impact on the financing of our initiative. And one last thing, I just wanted to expand a little bit on sector collaboration. So at the local level, we will have the municipal bonds, which give people the opportunity to reinvest into their own interests and into their own futures. At the state and the federal level, municipal bonds, state bonds, and federal bonds are actually all tax exempt from either state income taxes or federal income taxes. Florida specifically does not have a state income tax, but obviously the other 49 states don't operate the same way. Nevertheless, bonds are tax exempt. So that's a nice incentive for people to invest into this initiative. And finally, private collaboration. Venture capital, private equity, and impact investors have explained and expressed that they are willing to hold off on profits in order to make a positive social impact.
And FIU can contribute in a number of ways. We have the Institute of Environment, and many of their efforts by the department are using data-driven solutions to further investigate and resolve regional environmental concerns. And one of these examples is the Water Quality Monitoring Network as part of Biscayne Bay's health. And many of their critical investigations of the bay are identifying the alarming factors that are contributing to the algal blooms that, as we've seen, are killing off fish and many of the critical marine life organisms.
And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for your time and for the feedback that we are assuredly going to be receiving very, very soon.
Well, applause for me on timing. That was almost a perfect 10 minutes with a few seconds to spare and lots of great information for the time you had. So why don't we start with Dr. Diaz-Rocio?
Sure. Eric, quick question. Do you want me to give feedback and then ask some questions, or go straight to the question? What's the most helpful way to proceed?
If you have questions, you're welcome to start with them. Yeah.
Sure. Let me ask a couple of questions. The first one is, who's likely to oppose your proposal? Who are the likely people that you expect would form the opposition, if you will?
So can you all hear me well?
Yeah.
So firstly, thank you for your question. And secondly, unfortunately, we didn't get to cover it in this presentation, but we actually feel that the majority of people who would oppose this would be local council people who maybe aren't too involved in the tech space. in order to receive donations, in order to receive crowdfunding, and in order to make sure that that funding is used accountably, we would use something called a blockchain ledger. Are you familiar with blockchain?
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially, not everyone completely understands what blockchain is. I don't even fully understand what blockchain is, and I've been involved in the space for a little while. There are a significant amount of scams that go into the blockchain community and really take advantage of people who are just trying to do good. We feel like the best way to combat some of this hesitance that might be that we might expect for the blockchain aspect and the ledger aspect of the crowdfunding would be to make sure that we have a reputable and respectable blockchain developer who would be willing to create an algorithm and a ledger that we as a community and other communities within the United States who adopt this would be able to tap into at any moment's notice.
And what's your timeline? When do you expect, if this gets approval, when do you expect each of the different steps to take place?
So I'll answer that question in two parts. The first part is as it relates to the actual water pumps. And the second part is as it relates to the timeline of approving the initiative, getting approval from city council people, and boosting the confidence of those in the communities that are going to be receiving this. So the first part is the water pumps. We actually got inspiration for the water pumps and the water filtration system from an initiative that already exists, and it's called Miami Beach Rising Above. This initiative was obviously launched by Miami Beach, and they just took a very specific sector of Miami Beach that was highly susceptible to flooding, and they developed these water pumps that are energy efficient and low cost. So the technology already exists. It would just be manufacturing enough to cover the specific geographical area that this technology would be implemented in. Obviously, implementing this in New York is going to look a lot differently than implementing this in Miami, then it's going to be in Texas, and it'll be in Louisiana. That's completely dependent on the geographical area that the pumps are being put into. That's the first part. And the second part would be actually convincing local council members and convincing the federal government to help with the funding aspect. If we can find somebody who's able to actually execute the blockchain aspect of this and create the ledger for us, that would be easy for people to tap into. I think that the part of convincing will be very, very simple to do. Because if you, for example, buy a $25 bond, and I can actually just pull up in real time that you have purchased a $25 bond, and then I go and I buy a bond and my name shows up, and Gabriela goes and she buys a bond and her name shows up, I think it's very hard to refute that the accountability is there. And obviously that's the biggest problem. And I think that if we find somebody who's able to construct a trustable algorithm, then we'll be all good and we'll be able to convince people.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions for myself or anybody else in the group?
All right, I had a question. So I wasn't, obviously this affects coastal communities, but I didn't get a totally clear picture of like which communities specifically are affected by this and how their needs would be addressed. So if you could speak to that, that would be helpful. And then also, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I was thinking, how does this affect, how would your plan affect communities that maybe aren't coastal, but could still be affected by this problem or by the solution?
Yeah, so I'll tackle your first question first. Obviously, when we were composing this presentation, we did try to get an estimate of how much the water pumps would be. And then we realized how many areas are susceptible to being completely underwater in the next 30 years. The specific areas that I can remember off the top of my head, number one is South Florida, and Florida in general, but specifically South Florida. Then there's in no particular order, there's also New York, Boston, Louisiana, and Southern California. Those specific areas are at high risk of being underwater. Hialeah, especially in Miami. I think Vanessa just sent that in the chat. Yeah, Hialeah especially, which is I think it's like 95% Cuban in Miami and South Florida, is highly susceptible of being underwater. And I just want to paint a very specific picture here. So Miami is obviously significantly lower in elevation than the rest of the country, but there are some towns in Miami that are further inland that are even lower. For example, the town of Miami Lakes. The town of Miami Lakes, their middle school students actually are trying to get funding for something very similar, for water pumps, because even on the sunniest day, sunny day flooding happens and they can't leave their house for 2 days. During the last 2 hurricanes, they experienced more flooding than anywhere else in South Florida. And they actually had to have med evacs, as well as fire rescue and police, evacuate people from their homes because of all of the water that was there. So immigrant communities are largely impacted by this because immigrant communities migrate to major cities like Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Louisiana, as well as BIPOC communities. So I feel like these communities are not only immigrant and minority communities, but because they live in such major metropolitan areas that are at risk of flooding, it's really important to address these areas first. And that answers your first question and ties into your second question. Your second question was, how does this affect people who might not live on the coast? Well, people who live in Tallahassee don't live on the coast of Florida, but in 30 years are going to be underwater as well. And if we can start tackling this problem in coastal communities and use this as a tester, we're going to know what's going to work for us in 30 years when these non-coastal communities might be flooding as well. I hope that answers your question.
Great questions and great answers. And my role as timekeeper, I think will be really solid if we move to the feedback on this one. And then for the following ones, in addition to my 10-minute timers on the presentations, I'll give a 5-minute timer to the QA feedback session, and we'll end right at 3 when our first hill visit starts.
Any more questions or feedback? I'm sure we would love to hear them.
So I don't have any more questions. I do have feedback. Should we do the feedback after each presentation, or do we wait?
You can go ahead and give this group some feedback.
Sure. Okay. So I thought you guys did a great job. The introduction was very nice, very professionally delivered, very clear, very concise. I thought the presentation was very well organized. And I thought your answers to the questions were very good and very eloquent. A couple of areas for improvement. You mentioned the innovative funding strategies, which is a great idea. And then you mentioned some of those innovative funding strategies. I would have liked to see a little bit more about those, especially how to implement them. So a clear implementation plan, I think, would have been helpful. I think it also would have been helpful if you give this presentation to a government official who's very busy, who's doing all sorts of things. What is the one big takeaway lesson that you want them to remember from your presentation? What is the one thing that if they forget everything else, what is the one thing that you want them to keep in mind? I also would have liked to see a little bit more specificity and more details, again, especially about the implementation plan, which is hard to do when you only had 2 hours to put this together, I realize. And then to conclude, as I mentioned, I think your answers to the questions were very good. But only one member of the group answered questions, and I can see why. You're very eloquent and your answers were very good, but I would have liked to have seen others chime in as well and participate, not necessarily in equal amounts, but a little bit more of spreading out that responsibility for taking a leadership on the answers. But other than that, very solid.
Thank you so much. I wish that other people could have participated, but I physically cannot see them. So I don't know if someone's like raising their hand and saying, I want to speak. In the future, we'll definitely work on that. And I appreciate all of your feedback, and I'm sure the rest of our group members do as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rose, any key piece of feedback on this one?
I agree with Dr. Rosillo. I thought the presentation, for one thing, it's pretty, which is always nice. I think that you, especially Andrea, I can see, like Dr. Rosillo said, why you took the lead in introducing the presentation and also answering the questions, because you are very eloquent, but you all did a wonderful job. To me, I think my two biggest pieces of feedback. One is I like Dr. Rosillo would have liked to see some more specifics, more in terms of like who's affected by the problem. And I think that although my time working in the policy space and with government is much more limited than Dr. Rosillo's. I know that what people like to see in government is a number, a price tag, like a specific price tag. So I think that would have been helpful, even if it was just an estimate. What do you think this is going to cost the government specifically, but also other people? And then like a total price tag. So like, what is each group who might be participating and collaborating in solving this problem, how much is each going to pay? And then I know that you all only had 2 hours to put this together, but I think having more graphics and less words, so like infographics, ways to sort of paint the picture, and then you all do the talking and explaining, keeps the audience more engaged.
Thank you so much, Rose. And I know the other group has to present, but I just want to clarify one specific thing. I completely understand why it is that you want numbers, and we wish that we could give them. For example, for the city of Miami, what they did for the Miami Beach Rising Above initiative costed between $400 and $500 million. Miami is very geographically unique. We have a limestone foundation, which is not something that exists all over the rest of the country. So that number we would have to analyze and conclude on a case-by-case basis. And if you can find me someone who can do that in 2 hours, send them my way, because it's definitely not me. But I just wanted to clarify why it is that unfortunately we couldn't get those numbers. But if we were to present this in front of Congress, we would definitely take specific case studies and try to calculate to the best of our ability how much that would be. So ultimately, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. And moving right along, we'll make sure that the next group is able to get started pronto. Group 2.
Hi, thank you, Eric. So that was a great presentation, by the way. Great job, everyone in that group, Andrea as well. So this is our presentation. I'm just going to introduce myself really quickly, and then obviously the rest of my peers will introduce themselves. My name is Sarai Leon. I am an international relations major at FIU, and this is my last year. And I've had a great time in this fly-in kind of session that we've had for the past 3 days. You know, we had some really great conversation with all of the panelists that we've had over the past 2 days. And, you know, we got to talk about some really interesting things and get to know each other as a group as well. So I'm really excited for the rest of the people in my group to introduce themselves. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead. So I'm Kristen Briggs. I'm a graduate student here, a master's student studying geosciences at FIU. And I just cannot tell you how much I've learned in this fly-in. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to give us feedback on our you know, kind of quick policy ideas. So thank you so much. I'll let the rest go.
I think I'll go next. My name is Shireen Yamut, and I am a master's student at FIU. I'm getting my master's in international studies. And also I learned a lot, even though this is not really my expertise, my area of expertise, but I learned a lot in the past.
Hi, my name is Carlos Marquez. I'm pursuing a degree in physics, and this has been like a great opportunity for us, and we got to thank Eric too. I'll let the next person go.
I'm Marcella. I am an undergrad in the environmental studies program, and I'm looking forward to what you guys think about our proposal.
Just before Kristen starts, one of the great things about this is we have a great spread of individuals with different majors in our group. So we were really working on each other, kind of fact checking a lot of the science, and then them asking us about policy and like governmental things. So it was great. So I'll pass it on to Kristen now.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It was a really, really cool collaboration to think through all this stuff. And we all pretty much just kind of like made up for each other's, you know, shortcomings and knowledge. So it was really cool. So in thinking about a sort of national strategy for coastline resilience, as mentioned in the previous presentation, there is the challenge of the variability and the differences in these coastal ecosystems. So that is sort of a challenge to designing a strategy that applies to everything. So we sort of considered that and had that as sort of leading our ideas. So we've talked about this a lot throughout the fly-in, but living nature-based infrastructure is just a key solution for so many issues that our coastlines face. So just to give you a little bit of an just some of the benefits of nature-based infrastructure, Some examples are living coastlines, basically restoring mangroves and salt marshes, which are natural buffers, and essentially just restoring the barrier islands and the natural systems that create stability on our coastlines. They protect our coasts from flooding, erosion, and sea level rise. We know that those are huge issues that face our communities. And then, of course, they provide ecosystem services, which fuel local economies, restoring fisheries, providing natural aesthetic value for tourism. And they're cheap because they use local natural resources. And then, of course, it encourages sort of evaluation of these natural capital, which is such a huge issue. And then beyond that, it has beyond just the local impact, they tend to have a global impact because, for example, restoring mangroves sequesters huge amounts of carbon. So that's really beneficial for the atmosphere at large, as well as our local coastlines. So in action, there has to be certain, the considerations that we think are most important is to make these designs, these living coastlines or nature-based infrastructure designs, site-specific. So there needs to be preliminary assessments. Basically, this is an opportunity for a lot of collaboration between universities, scientists, and different entities that are involved in research and assessments of the economy of those areas. So they have to be, like I said, site-specific, and that way we're sort of ensuring that these designs are actually going to be effective and address the issues that that particular coastline has. And then monitoring systems are crucial, basically implementing some type of monitoring system along the coastlines that will allow us to assess whether these strategies are effective, and then of course to pinpoint areas that are most important. And then of course the data that is collected in that monitoring system is really sort of important to make specific to, again, tailored to that local coastline, because funds are limited. We want to maximize the use of funds that we have in that research so that we're really being able to respond to relevant data. And then of course, adaptive management strategies, so that any kind of stochasticity, variability in the ecosystem responses, we are able to effectively adjust our designs or maybe implement new designs to adapt to potential changes and assess whether they're effective. And then of course, collaboration is key. We need many different players and researchers involved in these designs and implementation, of course.
So we are proposing a federal program which provides funding to states based on their different local factors that their own coastal communities go through. And we want to put an emphasis on communities that are more vulnerable to sea level rise and would be the first to feel its consequences, similar to communities that we see here in Florida, which due to our seafloor, we are just naturally more at risk. And we want the federal and state to regulate the appropriation of funding in order to ensure that it is provided in a timely manner, and to local leaders of the communities in order to allow for these community trainings to occur that are based around the adaptation and resilience to climate change. We also propose a risk assessment on a state and local scale in order to understand which of their coastal communities are more at risk due to the climate crisis and will require extra resources. It'll also allow us to have a better understanding of where the funding needs to be appropriated, and it establishes a relationship between the federal and state governments and their own local communities in order to allow for the project and program to have a better design around what these communities are going to need going forward.
And so it's to go more in depth about how the funding would be provided by the government, or what we're trying to ask the government for, we need to understand that in order to establish a long-term sustainable project, we need to have like some type of a grant program that would be very adaptable depending on how the government changed, and just like for it to be sustainable for all projects. So the first part that we're suggesting is integrating communities and institutions as well as nonprofit organizations into climate resilience programs with providing adequate funding for quality education with transparent oversight of funding allocation. So basically just have like some type of integration with the government as well as nonprofit organizations in order to provide this grant, like this funding that we're asking for. And the second part would be encouraging and providing technical assistance as well as money for specific university programs to monitor and conduct climate vulnerability assessments. So since we're talking about Miami specifically and this part, I thought about providing two examples of programs that are happening. So first one is the FIU Biscayne Bay Health Project, and the second one is the Braceno Lab, a lab for water quality monitoring. And then with the promotion of set programs and projects that we're trying to build, we would also ask for like a promotion in order to build capacity in terms of technical skills and evidence-based required to design and evaluate projects. So basically also funding more educational programs that will give us more engineers that are experts of the subject, and also expanding partnership with the private sector and not putting the whole weight completely on the federal government, with also like help from the state as well as collaboration from the state. And then lastly, for the federal government to take a leadership role to ensure that and interagency coordination help states and local governments, as well as tribes, since we're talking about like the South Florida region, in order to be able to access like coastal resilience resources and support projects that are led by scientists and experts within the field.
So throughout, creating this presentation, we were really thinking of like local examples and current events that really worry us. So specifically, we talked about what's happening in Tampa Bay due to the wastewater runoff from the Piney Point phosphate plant, and that is an abandoned plant. However, they did find that the phosphate levels from that plant were 10 times, I think, higher than that from like just regular wastewater from the area. So we're thinking of ways that we can have some kind of corporate accountability and regulations and really just preventative measures to make sure that local communities don't even get to the point that they are being affected by these issues. So we just wanted to kind of encourage state governments to regulate nutrient management systems. And this goes back to the monitoring systems that Kristen brought up, basically monitoring the levels of excess nutrients in any wastewater that corporations produce, particularly agricultural corporations or other plants in the area, and making sure that they measure the effectiveness of reducing nutrient-rich wastewater. A lot of these management systems already exist, but they are not as effective in reducing nutrient-rich wastewater as we would like them to be. So just making sure that the state governments are monitoring that, because this can affect coastal communities through algae blooms, and that results in fish kills, which honestly, affects the tourism industry, small businesses, and just the community in any bay or coastal areas. And we would call for like regular inspections of these management systems, and these inspections can be conducted through a lot of state governments have like an environmental division. We also would want to implement a set limit of fines on corporations. We realize that a lot of corporations break a lot of violations and they would just pay a fine just to kind of get it out of the way, but we would set a limit on that. And then if there is a excess of fines being paid, perhaps conducting a thorough investigation by ceasing operations. And then the last thing that we wanted to do to bring it back to the community is finding a way, if there's like any of those fines are being paid, bringing it back to the community as a local relief fund if the community is then impacted through the algae bloom or through the fish kills, to make sure that the community is being considered when it comes to preventative measures and corporate regulations. So that's something we did want to bring up in this presentation.
Sir, I'm going to have to stop you guys there. It's a minute or two over 10 already. So I'm going to start a clock for 5 minutes and start with Rose this time. It'd be great if we had a minute to spare from this session too. If Rose and Dr. Dios-Rocio, you have maybe one question and some key feedback for the group. Rose?
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to just go straight into the feedback. I think you all were again, you all are very eloquent in presenting the information, and you all know a whole lot more about this subject than I do. But in terms of the presentation itself, I think something that Dr. Rocio touched on very briefly in our last round of feedback is when you're presenting these policy recommendations, whether it's like this, where you're giving an oral presentation or you're writing someone an email or putting it into a report, they don't have a lot of time and they don't like to read a lot, is my experience. So in terms of your presentation, for the next time, I would limit the amount of writing that you have and present things more visually, or condense the amount of information that you're making them read, and use that as notes to deliver the information. Because otherwise, like, I found myself reading a lot of what you were saying rather than, or being distracted by listening to and reading at the same time. And then also, I've found that a good structure for presenting things like this is to start by clearly defining what the problem is and then offering solutions. And I felt like in this presentation in particular, the problem was being defined at the end rather than at the beginning. So I would definitely start with defining the problem and then offer your recommendations for how to address the problem.
Thanks, Rose.
I'll go now. I completely agree with Rose. I think you have a lot of great information, but I was distracted, like Rose, reading and deciding, do I read or do I pay attention? Because I really wanted to read everything you had to say. So I think you had way too much text, which means that it could have been a little bit punchier and like Rosette said, with more graphics and fewer words. I think you can accomplish that more effectively. I also think you could have gotten to the point much earlier on. You spend a lot of time on the introduction, and exactly as Rose mentioned, right, you left sort of the definition of the problem to the second half, and by the time you got to it, you were almost out of time. You mentioned a lot the need for partnerships and to integrate different stakeholders into the climate resilience program that you're suggesting. I would have liked to have heard how you propose to do it. And how do you integrate these different stakeholders? How do you bring them together? Similarly, you mentioned encouraging state governments to do X, Y, and Z. How? Again, what's the implementation plan? It's not just encouraging. There has to be a plan so that you can encourage them to do specific things, right? Is it legislation? Is it regulation? How do you accomplish those objectives so that those encouragements lead to actual policy solutions? So a little bit more about that, I think would have been great. And like I mentioned for the first group, a big takeaway lesson that the busy member of Congress or government official could really remember from your presentation, because I completely agree, right? These are people who are very busy, who get 3 or 4 or 5 briefings a morning. And so you want your presentation to stand out so that they I remember this presentation, and here's the problem, and here's the proposed solution, and that proposed solution is awesome, and I want to go implement it. What do I need to do? So that allows you to be punchy and get to the point right away so that you can deliver your message much more effectively. But overall, I think you had a lot of great information in there.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. We were just trying to put so much data, but thank you so much.
Yeah, we're hearing a theme to all the feedback across the presentations that I think goes back to Carlos's point about Hill visits earlier, of be brief and be gone. So we'll be able to practice that in just about 10 minutes. And so without further ado, let's knock out group 3. It's a great presentation.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for being here and taking the time to listen to our presentations. We really appreciate it. We want to keep this introduction brief, obviously. So just to quickly introduce ourselves, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm an undergraduate student at FIU majoring in international relations and philosophy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nadia Cedar. I'm a PhD candidate at FIU in the Earth System Science program.
Hi, I'm Amanda DiPerna, and I'm a marine biology undergraduate major at FIU.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Ramirez. I'm a student of the Master of Arts in Global Affairs.
Good afternoon. I'm Ms. Munoz, a graduate student studying international relations and biological sciences.
Great, and we're just looking to speak with you all about our policy solutions for environmental coastal resiliency. And we wanted to start off by discussing, our vision for this issue and what we really define environmental resiliency to be. We think it's important to mention that we're talking about the entire community, the people and the ecosystem itself, and we want to make sure that these are, thriving communities, thriving coastlines that can withstand and recover from different types of disasters. And we've implemented some policy solutions that my colleague Jonathan will start to go into.
Thank you, Diana. So we organize our priorities in 3 main points. The first one is the social and economic well-being of residents of coastal communities. The second one is the healthy and clean shorelines and natural areas like Biscayne Bay. And the third one is the commitment to sustainable development and a just regenerative economy. Now, regarding our first priority, social and economic well-being of residents of coastal communities, we would like to propose 2 main solutions. The first one, we condensate the information in insurance community, no individuals. For example, reforming the National Fire Insurance Program. This is really important for us because, for example, in 2019, there was a gap of $1.4 billion between the income and the outcome the federal government ended up matching in order to continue with the program. And we consider that this amount, for example, can be used in our second point, that is an adaptation planning with emphasis in environmental social justice in different communities. This, of course, depends on each one of the locations. And then we can organize these communities in 3 different levels, immediate threats, high threat, and medium level of threats. And of course, the implementation has to be dependent of each one of the states. Now we'll pass to Nadia.
Thank you, Jonathan. For our second point on healthy and clean shorelines and natural areas, we are proposing living shorelines because they provide multiple co-benefits, including providing a habitat for wildlife, stabilization of the shoreline through prevention of erosion. They reduce flood risk by opening up natural spaces so that flooding is going over those areas as opposed to going into someone's home. And they also improve water quality. I'll now pass to Amanda, who's going to talk a little bit more about water quality.
Yeah, so as Nadia mentioned, water quality is very important in protecting our coastal ecosystems. So I'm going to be highlighting a vision of FIU that relates to this topic, which is the Greater Biscayne Bay Monitoring Data Network. And what this network would do is serve to predict the extent of toxic algal blooms in coastal areas such as the Biscayne and Florida Bays. And it utilizes cutting-edge technology and techniques developed by FIU researchers, such as buoys and drones, which would serve as early warning systems. And we currently have 3 deployed, and we'd love to expand this number, as well as GIS applications, which allow for more fine-tuned projections, water cycling modeling, as well as long-term monitoring and tracking via long-term interagency database, which would operate on the federal, state, and local level. And this network is in line with the EPA and NOAA, and it's very beneficial also for the health of coastal residents, as well as financial impacts that are caused by harmful algal blooms and red tide. And so what our collaborative testing network would do is focus on these 3 key zones of Biscayne Bay that are at risk for algal blooms. And so in the northeast part of the bay, we want to focus on a better circulation model, which would mainly focus on the flushing rates into the bay using our technology of buoys and drones. And then in the central part of the bay, we would monitor the canal system and the effects of the waterways. And then lastly, in the third part, which is the south, we would focus on an assessment of septic tanks as well as their impacts on the nutrients in the bay.
As part of our commitment to sustainable development and a regenerative economy, we would like to see all new buildings in Miami adhere by a silver LEED certification or higher. This certification is used to determine how sustainable a building is, infrastructure, and this can include either where green materials used and how efficient water and energy are as part of the building. And this certification will guarantee that the development and all of its subsequent effects remain environmentally conscious for the future.
And just building off what E. Delamis has said, we really want to make sure that we're emphasizing that we want a just regenerative economy for everyone. And we believe that Miami, again, it's ground zero for climate change. So we really need to look into how we can be a part of the solution and leaders in this field. Part of the way that we think we can do that is by proposing the use of solar energy and just reiterating that this is also good for the economy. It builds new jobs that are salaried, unionized, and can just help, again, promote our economy down here and all over the country.
So to summarize, we focus our proposals on 3 main points: the social and economic well-being of coastal communities, the health and clean shorelines, including natural areas, and a commitment to sustainable development and a regenerative economy. We proposed a few different solutions for each: living shorelines, LEED standards, renewable portfolio standards, reforming the national flood insurance, and we do hope this can serve as a more general model for environmental coastal resilience. Thank you.
With 3 minutes to spare, that really puts us in a good spot. I'm going to use my moderator's privilege to throw in my own piece of feedback to all 3 groups to remove the word just from your vocabulary when explaining your own work or priorities, not in the fair way, because I noticed there was like just and sustainable in that slide, but you're not just here to talk about coastal resilience, or you're not proposing just to do some new project. You're saving the world. That's true of these project proposals, and that's true of any time that you're explaining what you do in your degree program or in your jobs or when you're in an interview or elevator pitching yourself. There's nothing just this or that about it, because just is very diminishing in terms of it's no big deal, it's not that important, it's just a small idea. And so that's my piece, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Diaz-Rocio.
Sure, thank you. Again, another great presentation. I like the fact that you had tons of really effective, neat graphics. I did not feel in this case that there was too much text, which is great. I like the flow. You had your vision, your priorities, then you went over some specific solutions, and then you had a summary slide. I thought that was very, very effective and very well organized, and it made it very clean and very elegant, and therefore the message was very clearly delivered. However, you use a lot of buzzwords and phrases that have very specific meanings. Let me just highlight a few of them. You said cutting edge technologies, collaborative testing network, sustainable development, social justice, just regenerative economy, renewable energy portfolio standards. Things that have very specific meanings. And one of the keys of an effective presentation, and by effective, I mean a presentation where the audience says, I want to go and do what these guys are telling me. One of the keys to that is to know the audience, right? And so if you're presenting, when you're presenting this to a government official, whether it's an administration official or a member of Congress, you got to be very sensitive to their political sensibilities so that they can say, that's something I want to implement. And so a lot of these buzzwords mean something very specific depending on which side of the political aisle you're talking to. So if you're presenting this to a Republican, for example, a conservative Republican, right, and use the word social justice, just regenerative economy, bringing union jobs to the area, they're gonna go, that's exactly what I don't want to do, right? And so you can still keep the message the same, but use the right buzzwords without altering your presentation, without altering your solutions, but knowing the audience and delivering the message in a way that is still transparent and rigorous, but not polluting it, no pun intended, with words that will turn your audience against you simply because, again, they're busy. They might not be paying attention that closely, but they hear words like social justice or bringing union jobs, and they're gonna tune off immediately. Or on the other side, if it's a liberal Democrat, they grab onto those words and they think you're gonna do something different from what you're doing. So knowing the audience and mapping out who those people are is very important, because you can have the same presentation, but having a spotlight on different parts of the presentation so that it resonates more effectively with those individuals who are going to read political connotations into what you're saying, even if that's not what you mean at all. But overall, again, the clarity of the graphics and the flow, I thought it was very, very effective.
Thanks, Carlos. And I know Rose has a hard stop at 3 and our 3 p.m. guest has arrived. So I'll let Rose close with a key comment.
Thanks, Eric. I just wanted to say first that I loved the fact that you all included your vision and sort of defined what like coastal resilience is to you. It made it clear like why you were doing what you were doing, why you made these recommendations in particular. But again, I have to reiterate the comment that I made to the previous group, which is always define your problem at the very beginning. So you define what your vision for the, like your vision of the solution to the problem, but did not, in my opinion, clearly define what the problem itself was. And somebody that you might be presenting to in the future, they might have just been thrown into this meeting without actually knowing what the subject is. So not that you want to like be pedantic or belittle anyone's intelligence, but you definitely want to make sure that you're educating people when you're presenting to them a little bit, because they might not know as much about the subject as you do. Like me, I don't know almost anything about it. So it's good to define the problem at the very beginning, and so that the people that are listening to your presentation know why you're presenting the solutions that you're